the particulars aside, I was pleasantly surprised how much I enjoyed this one. What it's about, it stars Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum, and it takes place during the late 1960s during the great space race between the US and the Russians. And obviously, as we all know, there's a lot of historical implications of that, like the whole world was watching who would win, democracy, communism. So both of these countries would be willing to do just about anything to be the first. There's a lot of conspiracies. We faked the moon landing. The Russians say we did. That's what this movie's supposed to be about to its core. It's kind of showing you like a little bit behind closed doors how this race actually went. And it's really interesting the way they tell this with a comedic undertone that's very noticeable. It has two main leads, as I just mentioned. Channing Tatum, he's the flight director. He's incredibly serious about his job. He has past implications. He was the flight director on the failed Apollo 1. He misses his crew that died. Then you have his contrast. He's working with Scarlett Johansson's character. She really doesn't even care. He's just this ruthless, vindictive marketing agent for NASA that was hired to kind of sell this to the public and get everybody on board with the fact they're spending so much money. As I just said, this movie is very heavy-handed when it comes to the comedy. Like, not just talking about it having a lot of jokes or having comedic relief, but the jokes are very cartoony, like very Looney Tunes feeling, at least the first half. One of the first scenes in this, a guy's in an explosion. One you lead to believe would probably kill a person in real life. And he just kind of gets up, he kind of pads himself off, and he tells a couple one-liners and walks away unscathed, no damage done. From that point on, I was kind of thinking, like, is the whole movie going to be like this? Fortunately for me, at least, the rest of the movie is not as heavy-handed as the opening scene. The second half gets a lot more serious with a comedic undertone. But if you're unfamiliar about anything going into it, just be warned. I mean, this is very serious subject matter, talking about the space race stuff. This is not a very serious movie. It's very comedic. The biggest standout in this film is definitely the acting, and you'll notice people in the background scattered throughout during the entirety of the film. You've seen them in minor roles. But all three of the major leads in this, I think, are exceptional, and they're all very different characters, which I really enjoyed. As I mentioned in the opener, you have Channing Tatum in this. He's playing this flight director for NASA. He's responsible for the flight of Apollo 11 getting to the moon before the Russians. And it was interesting to see him in this because in this one, he's very serious. And at least everything I'm familiar with, all of his other roles like Magic Mike, 21 Jump Street, he's always this like dumbass jock meathead. And he's not at all in this one. He's this very intelligent, smart, caring guy who works for NASA. And it was just an interesting contrast to see him show his range and diversity. I really enjoyed it. Thought he was very well cast in this. He's playing this retired pilot who works for NASA. And the only reason he's not an astronaut himself is they discovered he had a heart problem. What's really interesting about the character he's playing is he's a very like moral person. He wants to do good. This is the only thing he cares about. It's getting these astronauts to the moon safely. It's very personal to him because he was in the wars. And he's a veteran himself. He understands serving his country. And he's a contrast to Scarlett Johansson's characters I'll get into in a second. But it's interesting because he's very connected to this mission. He was the flight director for a failed Apollo 1. He feels like those men's death is on his shoulders. There's a real patriotism that like kind of oozes from his character. You can't help but feel sympathy for his character. Again, I think he was incredibly well cast. Glad he got to show a little bit of range in this. The person he's working with is played by Scarlett Johansson, and she's just a complete contrast of everything Channing Tatum's character stands for. Like, he's a very cutthroat feminist marketing guru who used to work for Ford or some auto company. The US government comes and kind of tasks her to lead the marketing department for NASA. Their funding is failing. They really want to beat the Russians, but the most important thing is that US morale from like the citizens is failing. Like they don't even believe in the mission anymore. They don't really care. They don't think we could win. They task like the best marketing guru they can find in her to kind of rebuild NASA's marketing, get the US citizens back on board, get some more funding from senators. So her entire character arc is kind of rebuilding NASA's reputation more so than actually helping with the mission. She's not really involved or doesn't really care with that for the majority of the film. So it's kind of an interesting contrast. All he cares about is actual results, getting these men to safety, like accomplishing the mission, doing something for his country. And she's the polar opposite and kind of doesn't care. She's just lying, manipulative, doing everything to run up their budget. What's so important about Scarlett Johansson's character in this is because she's such a lying and manipulative character. In theory, you should just not root for her. She should be so unlikable. But due to the fact she's such a good actress and the way she toes the line of just coming off as flirty and lighthearted, you never really dislike her character, which makes the dynamic between the two and their butting heads more playful than it is miserable to hang around in. The third and final character that really stands out in this one is Woody Harrelson's character, obviously because he's a great actor. I love this guy and everything he's in. But in this, he's exceptional as well. He's playing this very shadowy government agent. He tasked Scarlett Johansson with joining NASA in the first place. This character is really interesting because he adds a wrinkle to this movie you don't expect going into it. Like, everything he's trying to do kind of contradicts what Channing Tatum's trying to do. Channing Tatum's trying to basically do a successful mission legitimately. He thinks it's very like purposeful. Basically, Woody Harrelson's character doesn't even care, like all the way up to the president. Like they just want this to look good. The optics of this to be good for the world, the US civilians. So he's basically, all he cares about is publicity. He wants it filmed when they get up there so the world can see it. But more importantly, he's not actually very confident due to all the publicity Scarlett Johansson's character's created that they'll even succeed. He knows it's absolutely like they cannot come back as a country if they fail on the world stage because everybody's going to be watching, like 400 million people. So he tasked Scarlett Johansson's character of actually in a separate bunker designing a fake moon landing, like that we always hear about in history. So he has her do that as a backup plan. And the plan is that, in regards to the real mission, if it fails, they'll have a caveat and they'll have a way out. They can film this, they can air it to the world. You have this weird dynamic going on where Channing Tatum is very moral. He's trying to do the mission. Woody Harrelson's very like shadowy. He's trying to like pull the strings behind, like he's the Illuminati guy, as I said. And Scarlett Johansson's kind of playing second fiddle to both. Because as I just said, you have so much going on in this. You have the real mission with Channing Tatum. You have Scarlett Johansson's marketing antics. You have Woody Harrelson pulling some strings. You have this fake moon landing they're filming that's pretty funny. You also have the real dilemmas with their flight. You have the interpersonal relationships between Channing Tatum and Scarlett Johansson's, like romance that's kind of budding. You have so many things that break up this movie's runtime from being over 2 hours. It doesn't really feel long or boring. It just feels kind of fresh. And that was important to me because this is not subject that I'm really that interested in. Again, not super disinterested. It's not really in my wheelhouse. So it's not something I'm particularly interested going into, but I had a good time with it. And also going back to the opener, as I mentioned, the movie having a very cartoony, comedic sense of humor. It does, but about the halfway point in the film, I feel like it got a lot more serious. There's definitely some very profound, heartfelt, sad, like touching stuff that really resonated with me in the second half of this film. I did not expect going into it. Again, you have some of the stuff going on with the concept of Channing Tatum's loss of his men, how important this mission is. You have the budding romance between Scarlett Johansson and him. I thought that was actually pretty believable. Like, I really liked the character dynamic between these two as it started to grow because, again, there's a lot more turmoil to it. Felt a lot more realistic, a lot more enjoyable than a lot of these like romantic drama comedies are. With all that being said, I definitely think this is a pretty predictable film, but I think the journey getting to where you know it's going is very enjoyable. When it's all said and done, you'll leave this one feeling happy. It's definitely a feel-good movie. Like, it's a movie that makes you proud to be an American, especially when you watch it on the 4th of July, which is an awesome contrast, I think, because the narrative nowadays surrounding the US, the way everyone talks about being here, it's so bad. It's never going to get better. It's just so negative. It was an awesome contrast to get that like proud American feel again. So I really enjoyed it. While I went into it with not many expectations, I left thinking it was a pretty damn good movie and I would buy it on Blu-ray. I know it's not officially out yet, but have you guys heard of this one? Do you have any hype or are you looking forward to it? Comment down below or let me know what your favorite Channing Tatum Scarlett Johansson movie is. As always, if you haven't subscribed, what the hell are you waiting for? I do it all on this channel. I do new releases, scary stuff, movie rankings, tier list, all that. Join me down below. Peace.